That's not poetry, but I think it's a poem. I wrote it, I can call it a poem. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ryan Newsmeyer. I'm Director of Communications here at Vermont Humanities. That was poet Jeff Hewitt. One of my highlights this year was getting to spend time in Vermont state parks with poets like Jeff, James Cruz, and Judith Chalmer for our new Words in the Woods program. It was great to get off of our Zoom screens for the day and spend some time walking around our beautiful state parks. Words in the Woods was originally going to feature these poets leading groups on hikes and reading and discussing poetry. But like so many other things in this sad and strange year, we needed to adjust.
September clouds trail the hillsides.
Now that we're at the end of 2020, some of us from Vermont Humanities wanted to share the things that we'll remember from this strange, yet sometimes uplifting year. I'll remember making the Words in the Woods videos, but I'll also remember a discussion led by Jarvis Green from JAG Productions that we hosted on Facebook Live in the middle of the summer.
You know, lately I've been thinking about joy and I've been thinking about pleasure to, you know, sort of to balance some of that rage and some of that pain. And, you know, a lot of my work, and there's a lot of pain in the work, right? Because it comes with telling the story of being Black in this country.
He led the discussion with poet Major Jackson, choreographer Felicia Swoop, and writer Desmond Peoples. This was our most viewed event on our social media channels during the year, and it also generated the most discussion on those channels.
Revolution is people kind of resist revolution. Even Black folk resist that word. But what we're talking about very simply is moving closer to what we can be as both a community and as individuals without the fetters of the past.
The first Wednesdays with Reuben Jackson on Duke Ellington was, wow, I think I'd been here maybe 2 weeks. So it was my first Wednesdays. It was my first major project at all. And was such a good thing to start with because it was an incredible event. It might've been my favorite one I've been to so far this year.
When I was putting this playlist together, I thought of a former high school student of mine. I taught high school in Burlington for 2 years, and he'd never heard what we call jazz or any type of music without words. And he said, after hearing this piece, because I tied it into a unit of some literature from around the same time, American literature, and he said, you know, I was trying to picture what the composer was saying about rain and rainy nights,
so his talk was called I Wonder as I Wander, and he played a number of selections from the Queen's Suite, which was something that we don't typically think about all the time with Duke Ellington's body of work.
I mention that because maybe what you want to think about as we progress is what you're hearing or what your ears are seeing as the music plays. And
it was a great start to the digital season. It gave me a lot of ideas and a lot of hope for how the season can go forward and still be incredibly successful and give the community what they're looking for, but in a very different platform. And it was just a testament to how wonderful of a speaker and performer Reuben is.
More than one person has discussed the fact that Ellington, in many cases, translated his love for visual art to the orchestra, and that the timbres and colors.
The first Wednesday's talk that was presented in partnership with the Rutland Library, and that was all about migration, and in particular night migration of birds.
And now everything becomes a bit quieter. But I want to challenge you to still think about how we can continue to connect with the landscape through birds. And so fall birding is a little bit different. I think it's much calmer, it's a little bit more subtle, but there are still things throughout the fall season that kind of come and go that we can take advantage of.
It was a lot of fun, not only to hear Bridget's incredible expertise in the area, but also to hear everyone chiming in with what they were seeing in their own backyards and on their own walks in the woods.
And I'm seeing here from the chat box, a couple people are like, birds are hyperactive. Oh my gosh, Sharon, I'm so glad you noticed that because we're going to talk about that tonight. Geese flying south, right? That's a huge sign. It's also an audio cue that things are different.
Another really striking piece for me is how many more people can participate by presenting the programs digitally. And it just makes it so much more accessible I think of people that have young families and things. Going out in the evening can be a real challenge. So it's all so much more accessible now.
With the passage of the CARES Act in April, we learned that the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts would receive funding that they could distribute through the state councils to organizations that were struggling with the pandemic. And so there was a tremendous amount of need for organizations in Vermont that suddenly found that they couldn't do much of anything.
We basically found ourselves with no audience for our music series, no participants in our art education work, and our studio became empty.
And so we worked with the Arts Council to combine our funding and create one grant program that put about $780,000 out into the community through the CARES Act in just under 2 months. The organizations that received grants were in every county.
The Old Stone House is this gorgeous, vibrant organization up in northern Vermont, and it is the largest repository of Orleans County history in the state, but it is also the proud home of the remaining collections of Alexander Twilight.
And most of them were small organizations, very tiny organizations that might have a budget of less than $250,000 a year. And so for them, a $5,000 grant from the CARES Act made a huge, huge difference in being able to keep going through the spring and the summer.
This funding feeds my morale big time. Seeing the creative effort between the organizations collaborating and uniting is inspiring and hopeful. It makes me strong at a time when we are vulnerable and we are weak.
I also need to say thank you, of course, to the Vermont legislature, who saw the work that we did in the springtime, knew that it was not enough, and allocated an additional $5 million from state appropriated CARES Act funding that was then approved by the governor and distributed around the state in the fall.
If we had to shutter our doors because of COVID-19, lack of funds, lack of tour revenue, and so forth and so on, we would be losing a huge asset to our community, our heritage.
And all of that has been absolutely critical for our sector, for museums, historical societies, libraries, performing arts centers across the state. Without that support, we would be losing organizations.
Art is what brings us together. It's what connects us. It's what keeps us in larger conversations. It's how we see humanity reflected.
And for me, at Vermont Humanities, that's one of the best things that we did this year, was support that effort to get pandemic relief funds out where they could be used to support the organizations that keep Vermont's cultural life going.
I know we'll come back together, and we will be a destination for people who really need that human connection, the moral compass, the philosophy that the arts can help us develop as a community.
2020 was just really tough all the way around, and it would have been easy for all of our partner organizations to just take a pause and pull internally, but they persevered and were able to get creative and innovative with programming and still offer communities opportunities to participate and connect with one another, as well as get rich humanities experiences. I attended Rebecca Rupp's talk earlier this year. It was our first Speakers Bureau talk to go virtual, or one of our first.
But it went over really well with the home front in Britain, who were groping around in the blackout and were hoping that carrots would help. So there was actually a logo called Dr. Carrot. It was a carrot in a lab coat.
You know, with everything as things change and the platform that we were presenting changed, we wanted to see how it went. It went really well. The hosts really worked well. Rebecca was very personable, and the Q&A, which is so essential to Speakers Bureau, that interaction with the people in attendance was vibrant.
Winston Churchill was a fan of peas. There's a wonderful Churchill quote that says that the best things in the world are hot baths, cold champagne, old brandy, and new peas.
We started out with Vermont Reads, and we had chosen the book The Hate Give, and realized through a lot of our community partners that we're a mostly white organization, and that talking about race in Vermont could be tricky. I was able to contact Dr. Laura Jimenez from Boston University, who is an expert on trainings with reading and race. So Laura came in February and spoke to a group of 40 people. They were librarians, teachers, and community members. And I would say that she helped us feel very comfortable in our roles there that day for the facilitation groups, but she also didn't let us off the hook, which I thought was very important for people to observe that balance.
Our intentions are not our actions. This one is really, really, really hard for white women in particular. White women always want me to give them the benefit of the doubt. I didn't intend. He didn't intend. They didn't intend. I'm going to tell you right now, I do not care what your intentions are.
She came again in October this year, and this time it had to be over Zoom, of course, because of COVID, and had a conversation with Jason Broughton, who is the director of the Vermont State Libraries. It was instructional, but it was also that feeling of eavesdropping in on a conversation between two people who have shared experience.
We're human, and sometimes, guess what? There is a compelling need to want to win a discussion, which is quite interesting when you think about that. I have to win this discussion on race, and it's like, well, how does that work?
So I'll tell you this, when I am doing these kinds of workshops, when I'm doing this work in libraries, when we're doing this work in classrooms, I ask people to understand that there is not always going to be a red bow, right? That nice little red bow ending, right? That we're going to learn and we're going to discuss, and hopefully we will change, but we are not going to come to an end. Instead, hopefully we will leave with more questions and more ideas as we exit the conversation.